Topic 4: Occupational Hazard and Control. In this topic, further discussion will be done on the introduction to industrial hazards, mechanical hazards including press machine and other machinery, electrical hazards, safe use of lift and escalators, noise and vibration hazards, radiation, pressurized environment and thermal stress hazards, safety for transport activities and gas cylinder safety, fire safety in building including Fire Services Act and building law, safety at constructions, and chemical hazards and chemical safety management. Now let's have a look at the introduction of industrial hazards. These are the terms that we'll usually use in our discussion: hazard, industrial hazard, safety, health, and risk. The term hazard is referring to the potential to cause damage and injury in a given environment or situation. Therefore, the terms industrial hazards can be defined as any condition or substance that produced by that particular industry that may cause injury or even fatality to the personnel, or may cause losses of products or properties. In the previous discussion, the term safety and health have been discussed. Safety normally concerning about the injury causing situations or hazards to humans that resulted from sudden severe conditions. Or, in a simple term, safety means freedom from the occurrence of risk or injury or loss. Meanwhile, industrial safety is referring to the protection of workers from the danger of industrial accidents, while the term health is normally concerning with disease-causing condition or the adverse reactions due to prolonged exposure to dangerous but less intense hazard. And lastly, risk can be defined as the probability that the harm will occur under the defined conditions of hazard exposure. For example, a technician that experienced or responsible in changing light bulbs. Definitely, these technicians will use step ladder to perform his duty. One of the hazards that may involve by this step ladder is use the wrong ladder for the job, such as the technician bring a 4-foot step ladder for a work that requires an 8-foot step ladder. If this happens, the technician might step on the top step of the step ladder to perform his duty, although there is a sign "Do not stand here" or "No climbing or standing on the top step." This scenario creates the hazard to this technician, especially on the safety issues where the technician might fall and gain injury. If the technician keep on using this wrong ladder, it will increase the risk for this technician. For some industrial plants, the nature of their activities, the substance that they use, or even the waste rejected by them may constitute hazards, and the effect will be greater if these plants are located close to the residential area which expose these hazards to the residents. For a workplace hazards, it can come from a wide range of sources such as substance, material, process, and practice that having the ability to cause harm or adverse health effect to a person under the certain conditions. Table 1 shows the examples of hazards and their effects. For example, this workplace may have hazard on the substance used in their process, which is benzene. A prolonged exposure to this substance may affect the health of the personnel or workers where they might caught leukemia. Please have a look at other hazards for this workplace and their effects. Why should we worry about hazards? At this point, we know that hazard can cause accidents or sometimes near misses accidents. Both accidents and near misses accidents can affect the productivity of that particular workplace. Accidents or near misses accidents can result in time and money need to be spent to retrain a new worker. The new workers is not initially as productive as the more experienced workers that has been involved with the accidents, implying additional costs to the company to replace goods or equipments that lost in the accidents. In some cases, it also might affecting other workers' motivation since they have been traumatized, feel afraid and unhappy to work in that workplace as they might get injured or died. And all of these factors can harm the productivity of a workplace. Some of us might inquire whether being exposed to hazards in a workplace, does it will always cause injuries, illness, or other health effects? The answer is not necessarily. It will always depends on the types of hazard presented, how a person is being exposed, what will be the effect from the exposure, the risk that can lead to injury, disease, or damage, the level of the damage, injury, or adverse health effect, how severe it will be, how fast the effect will shows. Is it acute, such as once exposed, the injury or harm can be felt as soon it comes in contact, or maybe there will be certain delay in the effect or is called chronic, or maybe it can take longer delay, such as exposure to asbestos can lead to mesothelioma, which a type of lung cancer. And will, by eliminating or removing the hazards, the effects can be reversible or irreversible. For your information, there are so many potentially damaging hazards. These are some of the examples. Hazards may be caused by the work environment, manual handling, chemical, energy, property, or even natural hazards such as flood, storm, and wind. These are the methods to identify hazards at the workplace. First, we need to observe the workplace. What will be the nature of jobs they are doing? What are the tasks? What tools do they use? Is there any hazards involved? Next is investigate the complaints from the workers. From here, we need to verify whether the complaints involve with hazards or not. Which hazards do they involve? Similar to examining the accident and near misses records or workers' sickness figures. If there is hazard, then normally the trend will be significant. Or maybe we can get the feedback about the hazards by conducting survey to co-workers with respect to their health and safety concerns in the workplace. And we may analyze the results of inspection by the employer, union, or other parties and reports or other related information regarding the workplace. Is it important to identify all these hazards? Yes, it is important. Why? Because we need to know the types of hazards involved to the workplace before we can control them using various approaches. The goal is to prevent workers from being exposed to the occupational hazards. One of the most effective measures to control hazards is eliminating the hazard or substitute with the less dangerous. Generally, there are 5 categories of control measures: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment (PPE). Combination of these control measures is advisable than relying on one method, and PPE should be the last option for the control measures. The term control brings the meaning of elimination or inactivation of hazard so that the hazard will be at minimum or even no risk to the workers who enters the area or work on equipment in the course of scheduled work. Controlling hazard can be done at 3 levels: source, path, and receiver. Some methods that can be implemented are engineering controls, administration controls, and controls through the use of personal protective equipment (PPE). Engineering controls involves with modifying or isolating processes, while administration controls is via education or training. Here is one of the example: a deep tank that produces hazardous fume to workers. In order to control this hazard, control measures can be taken to the 3 levels: source, path, and receiver. Maybe at the source, the material used can be substituted to less harmful material. Changing the process involved, isolate the process area and apply or install local exhaust ventilation. At the path, some of the control measures that can be done are a good housekeeping, increase the distance between the source and receiver, and use general ventilation. And at the receiver, the worker might need to use the PPE, reducing the exposure duration by implementing workers' rotation, and provide training and education to increase their awareness. In selecting a suitable control, it involves with evaluating, selecting, and implementing short-term and long-term control measures. For example, noise hazard is identified. Short-term control measure is require the workers to wear hearing protection such as earmuff or earbud. While for long-term control measure, the source of the noise is being removed or isolated. From this hierarchy of controls, the engineering controls such as elimination or substitution of the source is found the most effective control measure. For this, physical change to the workplace is required. Meanwhile, the use of personal protective equipment (PPE) is the least effective control measures. This method requires the workers to wear or use something. And for administrative controls, which includes work practices, having moderate effectiveness level. For this type of control measure, it will require the worker or the employer to do something, such as training courses. The term elimination means getting rid of hazardous job, tool, process, machine, or substance which the best approach to protect the workers. The term substitution means replacing the procedure or process for the same work, but in less hazardous way as possible. In engineering controls, the control measure is aiming at the source. It limits the hazards but does not entirely removing it. Some of the approaches in engineering controls are redesign, isolation, automation, the use of barriers, absorption, and dilution. Administrative control aim to reduce the hazard exposure to the employee but not removing the hazards. Some of the approaches in administrative controls are safe work procedures, supervision and training, job rotations, housekeeping, repair and maintenance program, and hygiene. Personal protective equipment (PPE). The control is at the workers. Personal protective equipment and clothing is used when other control measures are not feasible and where additional protection is needed. Workers must be trained to use and maintain equipment properly. The employer and workers must understand the limitations of the PPE. The employer is expected to require workers to use their equipment whenever it is needed. Care must be taken to ensure that equipment is working properly. Otherwise, PPE may endanger a worker's health by providing an illusion of protection.